US President Donald Trump has warned Iran of consequences if it threatened the US. Addressing the press after meetings with French President Emmanuel Macron, the two leaders also said that they have agreed to work out a new nuclear deal with Iran. Russia's arms control envoy Vladimir Yermakov told a UN non-proliferation conference in Geneva that Russia continues its support for JCPOA and believes that Korean Peninsula settlement depends on JCPOA as well. US President Donald Trump and the First Lady host a state dinner in honor of their guests, the President of France Emmanuel Macron and his wife Brigitte. From spontaneous grooming to effusive praise, US President Donald Trump's fondness for French President Emmanuel Macron was on full display. As they posed for a photo opportunity, Trump leaned over and brushed something from the French leader's shoulder, saying, "I'll get that little piece of dandruff." US First Lady Melania Trump and her French counterpart Brigitte Macron toured the National Gallery of Art in Washington. Both dressed in white suits and high heels and escorted by experts from the museum, the First Lady stopped to look at a fountain and a painting of a man reading a newspaper. US President Donald Trump said that discussions ahead of the planned meeting between him and the North Korean leader were going well. Trump also added that Kim Jong-un has been very honorable. India's External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj is in Mongolia. Her visit to Mongolia from 25th to 26th April takes forward the outreach that began with Prime Minister Narendra Modi's tour to Mongolia in 2015. Swaraj will co-chair the 6th round of the India-Mongolia Joint Consultative Committee with Mongolia's Foreign Minister. Security has been beefed up and prohibitory orders issued in Jodhpur city ahead of the verdict in the rape case against self-styled Godman Asaram today. The verdict will be conducted from jail premises as pleaded by Rajasthan Police on April 21st. A 1940 Dakota DC-3 aircraft, which is to be inducted shortly into the vintage aircraft flight of the Indian Air Force, will arrive at the Air Force Base in Jamnagar in Gujarat today. The aircraft had started its flight from the United Kingdom on April 17th. Residents living near the coastal areas in India's southern Thiruvananthapuram city have been living under constant fear as the sea has turned rough. Reportedly, sea erosion caused due to high tides and strong winds has rendered many homeless, leaving their houses in a dilapidated state. The ongoing heat wave conditions have led to severe water crisis in India's southern Chennai city. Water capacity in the 15 reservoirs in the whole city has come down to 14%, and subsequently local civic bodies have decided to cut down the supply of water to the residents. Indian and Pakistani defense ministers sat together for the first time as their counterparts from other member countries under the framework of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization gathered in Beijing. At the meeting, their defense ministers both expressed confidence about joining the club this year. China has issued a report on the United States human rights situation in 2017. The report uses the solid facts and data to present the worsening human rights record of this world's biggest power that always professes itself to be a human rights defender. Xi Jinping stresses the importance of studying the Communist Manifesto. She said the purpose of reviewing the Communist Manifesto is to understand, grasp the power of the truth of Marxism and write a new chapter of socialism with Chinese characteristics in the new era. A Syrian government minister said that reconciliation deals are not offered to rebels in southern Damascus as an army bombardment continued. Ali Haider said that insurgents controlling the Hajar al-Aswad area and Yarmouk were mostly from the Islamic State and the Syrian government could not reach a final deal with them. A Syrian government minister said the Syrian government plans to recover an opposition-held pocket north of Homs city soon after it completes surrender deals with armed groups around Damascus. The Syrian army and allied forces are close to recovering the remaining few pockets around the capital. The European Union and the United Nations called for swift political talks to end the long war in Syria, saying the latest territorial gains by Damascus and its allies had not brought peace any closer. A top UN agency chief said civilians can no longer flee fighting and bombing raids in Syria because borders are so tightly controlled and neighboring countries are overwhelmed by refugees, creating some of the worst suffering in modern times. Nikol Pashinyan, a politician who forced Armenia's prime minister to resign, led thousands of people on a march after which he would keep up pressure on the ruling elite until they agreed to real change. Prime Minister Sir Sargsyan resigned on Monday after almost 2 weeks of street protests. Thousands rallied in California to commemorate the victims of the mass killing of Armenians by Ottoman Turks. People took to the streets of Los Angeles, home to the largest Armenian population in the United States. Armenia calls for recognition that the mass killing was genocide. Armenians in Istanbul commemorate the massacres perpetrated by the Ottoman Empire's forces in 1915, a day after the unexpected resignation of their Prime Minister, Sir Sargsyan. Parents of the arrested students led a march to the National Police headquarters in the capital of Nicaragua to demand the release of their children as tensions remain high after a police crackdown on protests. Supporters of the National Alliance Party held a protest to denounce alleged electoral fraud in last Sunday's presidential election in favor of the Colorado Party's candidate and Paraguayan President-elect Mario Abdo Benitez. Hundreds of indigenous community members gather in a makeshift camp near Brazil's government palace as a week of protest to reivindicate their rights and ancestral lands begins. Brazil's ex-president Lula, who is imprisoned for corruption, his workers' party, the green light to find a new candidate for the October presidential election in which he remains the front-runner. The leader of Turkey's IYI party called for Turkey to go ahead with a June election that would include her party despite drawing criticism from Turkish president. Congolese opposition leader Felix Tshisekedi rejected suggestions that he might do a deal with President Joseph Kabila at a rally which passed off peacefully on Tuesday. Tshisekedi is one of two main figures expected to seek to run in the election. Exiled businessman Moise Katumbi is the other. As voters in Greenland turn out for an election on Tuesday, many hope a new government can get its fragile economy up to speed to realize a long-term goal of independence from Denmark. Most of the just 56,000 people on the huge Arctic land say that they want independence at some point in the future. Italy moved tentatively towards ending weeks of political deadlock after the centre-left and the Five Star Movement both said that they were ready to start talks on a coalition government. The Israeli government said it had abandoned a plan to forcibly deport African migrants who entered the country illegally after failing to find a willing country to take in the migrants. Chechen strongman Ramzan Kadyrov, speaking on polygamy, said that men living in Russia's predominantly Muslim region can take as many as 4 wives, even though polygamy is banned in the country. Wall Street dropped sharply on Tuesday as concerns over marquee companies' warning of higher costs were exacerbated by the benchmark US 10-year Treasury yield piercing the 3% level for the first time in 4 years. Facebook removes a number of accounts and pages that advertised and sold social security numbers, addresses, phone numbers, and alleged credit card numbers of dozens of people following a report by news website Motherboard. Hundreds of Amazon employees protested against working conditions in Berlin, where the mega group's founder Jeff Bezos was due to receive a prize. Chanting and holding banners reading "Make Bezos Pay," workers gathered in front of the German publishing group Axel Springer.
Ganz wichtig ist da hinten. Hallo, hier in Schwarz. Hi, hey.
French police questioned billionaire Vincent Bolloré over allegations his group Bolloré worked on the election campaigns of presidential candidates in Africa in return for lucrative port contracts. Groupe Bolloré said its African business interests were under investigation. Three suicide bombers attacked Pakistani police and paramilitary soldiers in the southwestern city of Quetta, killing 6 police and wounding 15 members of the security forces. No one immediately claimed responsibility for the attacks. Canada charged a man alleged to have plowed a van onto crowded Toronto sidewalk with 10 counts of murder, as Prime Minister Justin Trudeau urged a rattled nation not to allow a senseless attack to shake its values. Toronto's government took a moment to remember the victims of the van attack that left 10 people dead on Monday. Toronto's City Council held a moment of silence and Mayor John Troy stood to honor the victims, including the 16 people who were injured. Two men who helped protect others when a gunman opened fire at a Waffle House were honored at the Tennessee state capitol on Tuesday, 2 days after the shooting that left 4 dead. A bus taking Australians and New Zealanders to ceremonies marking Anzac Day in Turkey caught fire on the way to Gallipoli. Touring Turkish cities ahead of the Anzac ceremonies, the group departed from the western Turkish city of Izmir to reach Gallipoli overnight ahead of the dawn ceremonies. A dramatic tackle of an armed robber was caught on CCTV in northern Mexico. A store customer wearing a cowboy hat can be seen removing his glasses and tackling a young man who enters the store pointing a gun at employees. Three missing Mexican students were killed last month in the western state of Jalisco and their bodies dissolved in acid after criminals confused them with members of a rival gang. 2 people have been arrested so far in the investigation. Gun salutes were fired at Hyde Park and Tower of London, and bells rang at Westminster Abbey to mark the birth of the royal baby boy, who is now 5th in line to the British throne. Kate, wife of Prince William, gave birth to the British royal couple's 3rd child at a hospital in London on Monday. A 7-year-old boy has received 5 organs in a complex procedure in northern England. Jay Crouch was given 2 new kidneys, a liver, pancreas and a small bowel. The transplant has enabled Jay to be able to swallow food for the first time since he was born. The statue of 19th century British feminist leader Millicent Fawcett was unveiled in Parliament Square. This is the first monument honouring a woman in a public space previously occupied by 11 statues of men. A painting of a reclining nude by Italian artist Amedeo Modigliani is set to go under the hammer in New York on May 14th with a record sale estimate of $150 million. Painted in 1917, the painting of the woman is the largest in his body of work and described as his most ambitious. A letter written by German composer Richard Wagner that underscored his anti-Semitism was sold to a Jewish collector from Switzerland at an auction in Israel for $34,000. The buyer's identity was not made public. The Prime Ministers of France and Australia urged their countries never to forget the horrors of World War I as they opened a high-tech museum dedicated to the 295,000 Australians who volunteered on the Western Front. Global wine production dropped dramatically in 2017 with a decrease of 8.6% compared to 2016 figures, due mainly to poor weather conditions in Europe. Wine production totaled 250 million hectoliters last year, a historic low. "17 Chinese and foreign astronauts gathered at China Astronaut Center to exchange experiences and discuss international cooperation to mark China's 3rd Space Day on Tuesday.